Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 690 is a version of bill which veteran members of the committee are very familiar with. We passed a version of this bill unanimously out of the House last year, ran into some challenges in the Senate, but we are bringing it back because we believe that this is one of the best things we can do to support students across the state of Maryland. Because reading is such a basic element of a child's education that it is central to every other subject, central to everything they do throughout their academic careers. We know that if a student is not reading on grade level by third grade, their chance of graduating high school declines, their chance of attending college declines, their chance of ending up in the criminal justice system increases. It is absolutely essential that we get reading instruction right. And so this bill asks, and the debate with the Senate last year got very complex because there are some technical points in the bill. But fundamentally, all this bill asks is that we screen every kid in the early grades to identify any reading difficulties, including but not limited to dyslexia, to identify any reading difficulties they're having and then intervene. It is a basic thing that, frankly, our school system should already be doing, but they're not all doing it. And so we need this bill to make that happen. And without further ado, I will turn it over to the star of the show.
Beatrice, it's very good to see you again today.
Hi, my name is Beatrice O'Keefe. I'm 10 years old and I'm in the 5th grade at Piney Branch Elementary School. In 1st grade, it was impossible for me to read. Everyone was ahead of me. All my friends were on higher reading levels. They were reading chapter books and I was reading picture books with little words. I felt mad and angry that I could not read. When I was in 2nd grade, my parents didn't understand why I could not read, even though my teacher said I was a great student and I would eventually catch up. But I didn't. My parents took me to a test. We found out that I had dyslexia. At the beginning of 3rd grade, I started to take tutoring 3 days a week after school. Tutoring was hard, but it was also good because it helped me to learn to read. I got a lot better at reading. I took tutoring in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. The principal of my school didn't think I would ever catch up, but then this year I finally caught up. I worked really hard, harder than everyone else, and if I had been able to learn to read during the school day, I would have had more time to do after-school activities and homework. I am lucky that my parents got me tested and I got tutoring. It is really expensive and there are families in my school who do not have the money. And that is not fair that they do not learn how to read. I think it would be better for kids to get screened for reading problems earlier so it would not be as hard for them to read and they will not fall behind. They will get the help they need sooner than I did. Please vote for the Ready to Read Act so all kids can get help. Thank you.
Beatrice, thank you so much. You did an excellent job. We're really glad you're here today. Thank you for coming. Carlene Spitulnik.
Chairman Kaiser and members of the committee, my name is Carlene Spitulnik and I'm here to support the Screening and Intervention Bill, commonly called the Ready to Read Act. I represent the Ready to Read Act Coalition, which includes groups concerned about poor reading outcomes in Maryland. The bill was drafted by school psychologists, Maryland teachers, and parents. There are 2 drivers behind this legislation. First, responding to parent and student testimony in 2015, the legislator directed a task force to meet and determine how to address dyslexia in Maryland public schools. After 2 years of research, the task force recommended adopting a prevention model using universal reading screening that would address all students who may struggle to learn to read before they fall behind. The students who will benefit the most from screening and early interventions include English learners, minority students, students at risk for reading difficulties like dyslexia, students exposed to or living in poverty, and students with dialectical differences. The second driver is public school personnel, who said they were tired of special education meetings where students were already 2 to 3 years behind in reading. Most students were not screened for reading difficulties or provided early effective reading instruction and interventions, like explicitly and systematically address foundational reading skills. Last year, similar legislation passed the House unanimously. On sine die, a conference committee version ran out of time before the Senate could vote. In preparation to reintroduce the bill, the coalition studied the conference language and determined that it was inadequate because it did not include the science behind universal screening. A screening instrument must be valid and reliable and must assess pre-reading and early reading skills that research shows are highly predictive of a child's later reading outcomes. Dr. Potter, a school psychologist, will address that component of the legislation, and Jenny Ravel, a reading specialist in Baltimore County, will describe how screening and early effective reading instruction benefits students and schools. If each school district screens students each year in pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade to see if students' reading skills are intact, we will ensure that all students have the opportunity to learn to read. As the Kerwin Commission interim report acknowledges, the parents and educators will attest, the majority of our students are not reading on grade level. It's time for Maryland to implement an early warning system to support reading success, and that system must include reading screening and foundational reading instruction and interventions. When we address students' needs early before they fall behind, we give educators the tools to equitably determine which students need targeted supplemental instruction before they fall behind. For these reasons, we request a favorable vote.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again. Dr. Potter?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kyle Potter. I'm a practicing school psychologist, and I'm a board member of the Maryland School Psychologists Association, or MSPA. MSPA is a professional organization representing about 600 school psychologists in Maryland, and I'm here today to voice our strong support for House Bill 690. As a school psychologist, I provide services across many areas, and the area where I spend most of my time involves evaluating students. School psychologists are often tasked with evaluating struggling students to help school teams determine if they qualify for special education services. These evaluations often include cognitive assessments and diagnostic reading assessments, among other tests. One of the main reasons MSPA supports this bill is because, as research shows, it is often the case that by the time students are evaluated through the special education process, they're so far behind that even with specialized instruction, they will struggle to catch up. Students who fall behind in reading are at risk for secondary negative outcomes, including emotional concerns such as poor self-esteem, anxiety, and depression, as well as behavioral difficulties that may manifest both at school and at home. The solution to these problems is to identify students who may be at risk for reading difficulties early. The way to do this is through a universal screening protocol where every student is screened in order to catch as many at-risk individuals as possible. Screening tools are brief, easy-to-use measures that can be administered to all students in a relatively quick time frame. Screening measures should be valid, reliable, and have strong predictive power. That is, they should adequately measure the areas they are designed to measure. They should be accurate in their outcomes no matter who administers them. And they should be able to predict with as much statistical certainty as possible which students may experience reading difficulties in the future. Screening measures should also directly inform follow-up assessment and/or implementation of effective targeted interventions. The Ready to Read bill includes specific skills such as phonological and phonemic awareness, letter naming, letter sound identification, word reading fluency, and oral reading fluency. And these are all skills that are included in the bill because research demonstrates they're highly predictive of future reading success. The Ready to Read bill's screening requirements follow basic principles of effective assessment while allowing enough flexibility to school systems to select screening tools that best fit their specific needs. MSPA believes that enacting the provisions of the Ready to Read bill will improve frontline reading instruction, tiered implementation of effective interventions, and improve our students' reading outcomes, all while reducing referrals to special education. For these reasons, MSPA stands in strong support of House Bill 690 and respectfully asks the committee for a favorable vote.
Thank you very much. And Jenny Ravel? Thank you.
Hello, I come before you today to ask you to consider the importance of early screening for all children. A quote by Maya Angelou speaks to me after a very successful screening of this year's first graders. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, you do better." As the reading specialist of a 1st through 5th elementary school, I feel confident that my children are set up for success thanks to early screening. As a literacy leader of my school, I have used screening in the past, but it was always done in a vacuum, so to speak. Intervention did not always follow the screening, and progress monitoring was lackluster at best. This year, however, after taking courses to learn more about learning disabilities and to increase my knowledge of screening and interventions, I knew what I had to do. My goal was to screen every first grader in my building, to share the results with the teachers, to provide intervention through direct instruction, and finally, to monitor each child's progress. This has been life-changing for the students and their teachers. The screening I used is brief, yet yields much quality information. Several children were identified with deficits, and interventions were quickly put into place. These same children may have gone unidentified for months or years, and intervention would have come too late, if at all. Allow me to give you some examples. One child I tested was able to read and comprehend on a second grade level, but the screening showed great deficits in phonological awareness skills. What this means is that eventually these deficits would have caught up with him when he had to decode multisyllabic words when he was older. At that point, however, no one would really know how to help him. Because of the screening, I was able to train the teacher in phonological awareness instruction, and she has provided the necessary intervention. His progress monitoring has shown growth in the deficit areas, and his reading skills have taken off as well. On the other side of the coin, I have identified children who are reading well below grade level. Those children have shown deficits in phonological awareness and rapid naming skills, and the teacher has been able to intervene for them as well. These same children would have met with continued difficulty in learning to read without this foundational knowledge. Once teachers, administrators, and others realize the power of the screening and early intervention, it would be a game changer for all who educate children. Unfortunately, sometimes educators in large school systems do not recognize a good thing until it becomes mandated. With the mandate would come professional development around screening that would then allow all educators to administer the screening and follow it up with intervention. House Bill 690 would be the encouragement that school systems need in order to reach all children, regardless of their socioeconomic background, race, or school placement. I encourage you to join me in doing better now that we know better. Thank you for your time and for your service to the citizens of the state of Maryland.
Thank you all very much, especially Beatrice. Any questions for the panel? Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Delegate Lukey, for this bill. Oftentimes, people look at a fiscal note as to whether or not they will support it. So I'm asking you, or one of your panel members, how do you see the early screening, your House bill, offsetting the fiscal note that could be anticipated in the future?
Sure. From a fiscal perspective, if we don't catch these reading difficulties early, we often have to do much more expensive interventions later. A lot of kids that don't necessarily need to be will not necessarily need to be on an IEP if the interventions happen early enough. And as you know, special education is much more expensive. The fiscal note this year is significantly different than the fiscal note last year. For example, last year Montgomery County said they could do this for a little over $3 million. This year it's $16 million. The bill hasn't changed that much, so we're trying to figure out where that's coming from. We'll see where that goes. But I think it will save money in the long term, regardless of what the fiscal note says right now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Delegate Guyton.
I thank you so much for bringing this to us. I just have a question because the fiscal note is so large. Can you talk to why you've decided to do a universal screening of all kids rather than just looking at screening kids who seem to be having difficulties in the classroom?
Sure. Screening is meant to really catch as many kids as possible early. By the time we're noticing that they're struggling, as many of the panel already said, we have difficulty getting them to catch up. It requires sometimes more expensive interventions. It requires more intensive interventions where they're oftentimes being pulled out of class, missing instruction. We really want to just cast a wide net early, catch as many students as possible before they get to a point where we're really saying, wow, they're struggling in class.
Thank you.
Just really quick about the student that I was talking about. I screened everyone, and although he presented as a child who could read above grade level, the screening showed these deficits that are like hidden deficits that we wouldn't have known. Everyone thought, when I went to the teacher, she said, no, he's reading fine. He was actually in special ed, and the special educator had no idea. So that's why we want to, like he said, have this big net, because a lot of things are hidden and only screening can provide that information.
Thank you. Delegate Riley?
In my opinion, okay, I think reading is the most important subject that the public school education or any school could actually teach and make sure that our students receive. Would you agree? Okay.
Well,
Reading.
as a former social studies teacher, I might debate.
Well, yes, but if you can't read, they wouldn't be able to learn social studies. Reading, it comes back to reading because it's a form of communication and understanding. You need to learn how to read to even do mathematics. It all comes back to reading, and that's what kind of blows me away that we don't put so much importance. It's taken this long to get this legislation through because reading is, I do believe, is very important. And so what grade level does the subject of reading actually end in our public schools?
You mean as an independent
As
subject?
an independent subject, yes.
So it varies a little bit by county, but for the most part, all elementary school students have an ELA sort of reading block. Many sixth grade students have a reading block. Mm-hmm. From then on, the type of reading instruction that happens is different. It's much more content focused. Mm-hmm. So there's still reading instruction that happens, but the assumption by certainly seventh grade, for the most part, is that the students have already developed the basic reading skills like phonemic awareness and. Okay.
So isn't that the importance of why we need to catch them at an early age and doing this in our elementary from pre-K, first grade, second grade? Because we can't wait until there's no other classes for them to learn how to read, basically. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Riley. Any other questions for this panel? Thank you all very much.